Tonight I'm joined by an absolute legend and one of the game's greatest names, Ian Storey-Moore. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Gabbie. Yeah, thank you for those kind comments.
And Storey-Moore, were you christened Storey-Moore or Ian Moore? Where did the story come from?
I was actually christened Ian Storey-Moore, actually, but as you can imagine, I think when I was young and growing up, the name was rather embarrassing. It sounded like from a posh family, which I wasn't. So I think it just related back quite a number of years ago when my grandmother, my great grandmother, she got married twice and kept the same names, Storey and Moore. So consequently, my father kept them, and when I was born, of course, it was Ian Storey-Moore. But I didn't like using it when I was playing football. But I think at a later date, it didn't concern me too much. And you can call me Ian Storey-Moore now, Gabbie.
Now, growing up in the 70s, I remember Ian Storey-Moore, because you are right, as a very impressionable kid, probably about 1970, 71, looking at football, putting a pair of boots on, going on the playground with a tennis ball, trying to emulate my heroes. That is a name that I thought, I've never heard a double-barrelled name in this working-class game.
No. Well, I think in those days there wasn't too many about, was there?
No, there wasn't.
That I can actually think of, really. But you seem to get a far more of them now, don't you, really? So, you could probably name quite a number now. But certainly in those days when I was starting football, myself, and there might have been the odd one or two, but, I vaguely remember. But, very few about in those days.
Now, the 17th of January, 1945, you were born. You were born in Ipswich.
Correct.
But you moved to Scunthorpe, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I moved to Scunthorpe when I was about probably 5 or 6, I think, if I remember. Yeah, my father became a chief architect for the Scunthorpe Borough Council, so we moved from Ipswich. And so I brought, my childhood was sort of mostly remembered by living and being brought up in Scunthorpe, and used to go and watch Scunthorpe United as a kid, and on the old showground there. And that's where I learnt my sort of football, really. I played local football there for the school team, and it was very fortunate that my father knew. My father knew a guy in Scunthorpe that knew the coach at Forest at the time, a guy called Joe Mallett. So he watched me play local football, and from that day onwards, he recommended me to Joe, and I went for a couple of trials at Forest, and consequently they took me on board, and that's how I started, really. So I've got a lot to thank Scunthorpe for.
Now, Joe Mallett, the Mallett plan, Birmingham City former manager. I
think he was actually on reflection, Gabbie. Yeah, very nice man, a very good coach. I think it was before his time, actually. He was one of the few coaches about in those days. I mean, most of them were just sort of physical trainers in those days, and but Joe was a very good coach indeed, and he helped me an awful lot.
Now, coaching, I think you're absolutely right. You guys learnt your trade by putting jumpers down for golf goalposts and playing with a tennis ball or anything that you could get your hands on, because cases weren't readily available in them days. So as kids, we played with anything, and we'd whack a tennis ball up a curb and up a wall, and that's how we kind of learnt our skills rather than be coached, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, Gabbie. I mean, we just, as you say, you got your coach down at 12 aside, 13 aside, and played on the field till dusk until your mother called you. I mean, I was fortunate where I live because I had a playing field at the back of the house, so spent many a happy day there. If it was, football in the football season, cricket, and that was about all we had to do in those days. So it was fantastic from where I lived. I had a lovely playing field. And you're quite right. I think that's where you learn your inherent skills, just playing among yourselves, how to dribble, how to shoot. And it just came naturally, and you didn't think about it. So, kicking, as you said, a tennis ball against a wall, and you just learn your little skills by that left foot, right foot. And I think these days probably get a hold of kids too early to coach, 7, 8, 9, 10, and teach them about shape and getting back into shape and all this sort of thing. I think it's too early for them to just learn. Let them develop naturally, I think.
I don't like the word shape. I never have done, because I like my football players to get the ball and attack players. And I don't think there's any greater sight in football than seeing a winger or an inside forward or a central striker going by a player, taking players on, bringing and drawing players out of position. And no greater exponent of the dribble, in my opinion, in modern times, because I know the wizard of the dribble was obviously Stan Matthews, but you were up there with Georgie Best, the way you drop your shoulder and take players on.
Yeah, well, I think that was a big part of my game, Gabbie. You know, actually, the funny thing was, when I was playing at Scunthorpe, I played for Scunthorpe Boys, I played at centre half, but
really?
Then I went to Forest, probably as an inside forward, and probably a guy from the Midlands, there's a guy called Jack Burkitt. I don't really remember. I think he was from the Black Country there, and he was the reserve team trainer at the time when I was just kicking off down there. And you know, I went to Forest, probably 7 stone waif, and I mean, I had a great thanks to Jack Burkitt. I mean, I didn't thank him at the time because he trained me to extinction at one time, up and down the terraces in those days, weights in the afternoon, and mine from being 7 stone suddenly shot up to about 12 stone in about a year or so. So made me strong, made me quick, and I've a lot to thank Jack Burkitt for, actually. So yeah, that was very much part of my game, to be able to pick the ball and be progressive and try and get past people and make something happen. I think these days a lot of negative players, you know, they're quite happy to get hold of the ball and pass it, get it back, make no progress, and consequently, as the teams get back into the shape and things don't happen. So you have to have 1 or 2 progressive players in a team, 1 or 2 positive players who are prepared to pick the ball up and go past people with the ball. It makes things happen then.
Yeah, don't get me started on stats, because stats can lie, and stats can make a picture of anything. Who did make an impression on you, I believe, was an inside forward who then got transferred in the year of my birth, 1964, to my team, Birmingham City, went on to play for Aston Villa after that, was a young inside forward striker named Jeff Bowden.
Yeah, Jeff. I mean, you know, Jeff was a lovely man. I remember when I first arrived at the City Ground on a warm July afternoon with a old suitcase, you know, not much in it in those days, and Jeff looked after me. He was asked by, I think it was Joe Mallet actually, to look after me, so took me around to the digs where quite a lot of the players were staying, and yeah, Jeff looked after me, and it's such a nice man he was, Jeff, and he had a real tragedy in his life. I think he lost his wife, and I think she was only about in her early 20s, which was a real tragedy. And but yeah, Jeff was a lovely man and a good player. And I lost track of him a wee bit when he left Forest, to be honest with you, Gabbie. But you know, all I can say is what a lovely man he was.
But you do that, don't you? When you play with, teammates, then when they're former teammates, you move on, they move on. You probably do lose contact with them. But
you do, yeah.
Was it a bit of a shock when Forest sold Jeff to Birmingham? Because he was ripping up trees at Nottingham, wasn't
he? Yeah, I think he was doing quite. I mean, it's quite a lot. I think he's probably, what would Jeff be now? If it be 80 odd, would he?
Over about 80, yeah.
Yeah, he's probably about 6 or 7 years older than me, Jeff. So, as I say, I lost a wee bit tracking, but I think he scored quite a number of goals at Forest at the time and was doing well. So, yeah, I was just saying Forest have been a selling team, really, Gabbie, and throughout, historically, and I think consequently it's always cost them in the future. Really, that's they've got 1 or 2 decent sides together, and for some reason or other, within a year or two, they dismantled them, and they've well, I don't think since Brian Clough won the European Cup, it's not been particularly easy since then, not been particularly successful. They had 1 or 2 little spells, but certainly the last 15 years it's been pretty dismal down there, yeah.
Yeah, I think most football clubs are, in fact, selling clubs. There's only 1 or 2 buying clubs, and I think even the buying clubs get diminishing now because, in the likes of Manchester United, when Real Madrid or Barcelona come calling, they sell their better players. But you went to Forest pre-Brian Clough, and
oh, yes.
for most of us, Brian Howard Clough changed Nottingham Forest, but Nottingham Forest had a life before Cloughie. And I remember growing up as a kid, there always used to be a song going around the terraces that started, "We hate Nottingham Forest." And as a kid, I could never understand that. But in 1966-67 season, you had your best season where you come runners up in the league. You had some fine players in that year, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Had some fine players. A decent goalkeeper in Peter Grummett. Terry Hennessy, I think he was a Birmingham player, wasn't
he?
Terry,
did.
I think he came from Birmingham, the Blues, didn't he? So Terry actually came as a midfield player, and it wasn't probably particularly mobile and energetic. Terry, he got found out in the middle of the field, but suddenly when we started to play back four, he went into the back four, and he became an absolutely superb player in the back four, and he was captain of that good side, and. People like Bob McKinney was a centre half. He'd been at Forest for years. I think he ended up playing about over 700 games for the club. Henry Newton in midfield, who was very energetic, very mobile, very underrated. Henry, he's a really solid midfield player with great energy and could score a goal. And he played alongside me, inside me, and he was a massive help to me. John Browne in midfield. He was technically a very good player. Could stitch things up in the middle of the park. Very clever with the ball. Joe Baker, it was a sad loss. We played Everton in the Cup that year and beat them 3-2 in the quarterfinal. And Joe sustained a very bad injury in that game. Was never the same player again, and he was sadly missed. I'm pretty sure if Joe had remained fit, we would have gone on to win something that league, either the league or the Cup that year. Finished second to Man United. Second in the semi-final of the Cup against Tottenham, and really disappointing at the finish, but still a reasonably successful season. The other player I'd like to mention is Frank Wignall. He played alongside Joe up front, and Frank was a real hard case. Frank really strong, terrific in the air, and he made so many goals for me. Just getting scraps off Frank, and a great lad and a great player. Frank, I really enjoyed playing with him.
Now that game that you've referenced, the quarter-final game against Everton. Everton took a 1-0 lead, didn't they? And
correct.
And was it Jimmy Husband that scored the goal?
Yeah, I think he scored two actually.
Yeah, he did.
They were winning 1-0 at half time, and probably deservedly so. I think the disruption the injury to Joe Baker in the first half really disrupted us, and I think I had to move and play alongside Frank Wignall, and I believe Alan Hinton came on down the left-hand side. We didn't really get going until the second half, really, but apparently people really enjoyed the game. Apparently it was one of the greatest games ever seen down there, and we managed to get back to 1-1 and 2-1 to us, and I think they scored with about 5 minutes to go to make it 2-2. And of course, the thoughts are running through your mind. Christ, might have to go to Everton next, whenever it was, for a replay. And had some great players. Everton at the time, Alan Ball, Howard Kendall, Colin Harvey. A plethora of really good players they had. So it would have been very difficult up there. But anyhow, we Big Wiggy got onto a cross from Big John Winfield, headed it back across the goal. And I think after about 4 attempts, I managed to get the ball into Met to make it 3-2. So as you can imagine, the crowd erupted that day, and it was a wonderful occasion for the club.
The crowd were erupting before that goal that day.
Possibly.
I've looked at the video, and I've got to say Everton's second goal, an equalising goal, was a great turn and cross by Browne. And your winning goal, you got the ball, you hit it, come back off the goalkeeper, and you've headed it in. It's hit the bar, and you followed it up. What a wonderful way to win a game of football.
Although it was rather fortuitous, I suppose it kept the crowd on edge, didn't it? Really?
It certainly did. And it was the perfect hat trick. It was left foot, right foot, and header, wasn't it?
That's right, absolutely, yeah.
But you never got the match ball?
No, I don't think they bothered in those. They probably couldn't afford to give it away in those days, Gabbie. It was expensive. I think we're only about 40 quid a week, earning 40 quid a week, so... to probably give you a match ball at £5, I thought it was far too much money.
Who was your heroes, Ian, when you was a kid growing up? Who did you want to be?
Well, my team was Sunderland, actually, because my father was from there, and used to go up and stay with my grandmother, when I was a kid, and he used to take me to the Roker Park, the old Roker Park. And let me tell you, in the late 50s, cool, you'd be looking at probably 60,000 there every week. Yeah. So that was a great thrill for me as a kid, my father taking me there. And I grew up admiring people like Len Shackleton, Charlie Hurley. Yeah, absolute, legends of that area. I mean, and Charlie Hurley, I mean, he's still a legend now, and Shackleton. And, I really enjoyed that. So they were my team at the time, Sunderland. And, I used to get disappointed when they lost as a kid. And I remember I might have been about 10, 11. I think they lost to Man City in the semi-final. I just listened on the radio and broke down in tears, actually, when they give a score out. So, a real Sunderland fan. And my word, haven't they gone downhill in the last few years? What a tragedy. My father would be turning his grave now if he knew what was happening to Sunderland.
The Bank of England club.
It was in those days, but not now, isn't it? They've certainly hit hard times now, haven't they?
Absolutely.
I mean, with their crowd resources, they should definitely play in Premiership football, shouldn't they, really?
All day long. One of the great English football clubs. What was your favourite ground? Did you have a lucky ground? What was your most unluckiest ground? I know you've scored against pretty much everybody. But...
Yeah, I did, funnily enough. I scored, I don't think it was at the time, I don't think it was a first division club I didn't score against. I think Newcastle was a bit of I think somebody once told me that I'd score more goals against Newcastle than any other team in the league at the time. So probably you would say that they were one of my fortunate teams to play against, yeah.
Now, was that because you was a Sunderland fan and you wanted to score more against Newcastle?
I never gave any thought at the time, but I always seem to score against, you get these games, don't you? These teams you play. Southampton, I was fortunate going down there and scoring goals at Southampton. And but yeah, I had, whether it was good fortune or good finishing, I managed to. I remember, I was going through it one day and thought, scored against them. So it was nice to think that you scored against all the better teams as well. At the times, the Liverpools, the Man Uniteds, whatever, Man City at the time. So I was fortunate to get in the end of a few things, and I think it used to give you a lift, and rather than the money in those days, Steve, you used to think about, I just thought about, getting a goal or a winning goal, or, doing something for the team that, provided a win for us, rather than think about the money we were going to get at the end of the week, which is very negligible.
Do you not think, though, that every footballer, that's what their ultimate dream is, to win, to score that goal and to be that hero, rather than to earn the amount of money? Because the kids don't go in the game for the money. Surely they go in there because they love football.
They don't initially, but I'm sure they're getting their heads turned now by when they read it. And I think it's the parents, actually, that do it now more than anything. I mean, when I was working in the youth department at Forest, it wasn't the kids that wanted the money, it was the parents, that came and taught silly terms for wanted for the kids, So I would imagine it's even worse now. I've been out of the game for quite some time now, and so it's disappointing in that respect. But since the advent of Sky TV, that certainly in the Premiership, the amount of money splashed about is absolutely obscene now, isn't it?
It annoys me because it seems as though not only is the money splashed around that's obscene, another obscenity of the modern game of football is the history books seem to be burnt. All those records of great players. You've scored over 100 goals in probably about 230 games for Nottingham Forest, and that's in the league.
I think I played about 320 odd games. I think Man United, and I scored about 130 goals. And, I would love
both clubs,
it was for a wide player, and then I thought, crikey, I'd love to go and score two. But of course, I got that bad injury at Man United and finished in. I was 28 years of age when I finished, so that was very disappointing in that effect. I think that was the most disappointing thing of my career, Steve, is a number of injuries I sustained when I was doing well, which was, very, very disappointing. I was playing well at Man United when I got a bad injury, just got my England cap, and I think the very next week or the week after sustained a really bad injury. So from probably that would be my biggest disappointment in my career, the injury I got sustained at important times for me.
Now, while we're talking about injuries at Manchester United, you're absolutely right, because that injury ultimately did it put paid to your professional football career in this country. Although you did go, we will talk about it a little bit later, and play in America in 1975 for Chicago Sting. But,
correct.
That move to United and the injury, was that an injury that had reoccurred? Because I'd read somewhere that you had a ligament injury that kept you out of the 1970 World Cup finals. Is that correct?
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, I mean, I say that was I think I played for England on the Wednesday, my first cap, and Alf Ramsey said, I did fine. He said, will you be in the squad for the next game? I think they were playing Belgium away I don't know, it was a fortnight's time or whatever it was, and it was either the next week we played Man City or the week after we played Manchester City away, and I sustained a really bad injury there, and it was a guy called Arthur Man. I'm sure he didn't mean it on purpose, but he clattered me, and it severed the ligaments in my ankle. Well, I was operated on the Monday, but consequently I didn't play again that season, and of course missed the trip to Mexico. Yeah,
just like Alan Hudson. Huddy done the same. His ligaments, he went down a hole on Easter Monday at the Hawthorns. And Huddy always says to me, he says, Paul, it'd be easier to break your leg than do your ligaments. And that's very true, isn't it?
Oh, well, at the time, he's spot on, because in those days, there wasn't such a thing as a scan. It was like when I was at Manchester United. I did exactly the same injury. And what happened was they did an X-ray. Of course, nothing broke. You can't see ligament damage on an X-ray. Yeah. So consequently, when the swelling went down, they thought it was going to be okay. They didn't realise my ligament was still in two. And so when the swelling went down, I was able to run a little bit, and they must have thought, another 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you'll be fine. So eventually I could run in a straight line, actually, at a decent pace, but whenever I deviated from that straight line or stopped quickly, it just used to go again and swell. So they didn't know it was until the end of the season. They sent me to Harley Street, and the surgeon there said that, or the consultant, whatever he may be, he said that you need an operation, and that was 5 months later. So in between January and May, I was doing more damage on it. So. Consequently, when the guy did operate in Manchester, he couldn't stitch it together. So, my ankle wasn't stable enough to continue to play professional football. It was as simple as that, really.
Did you find the more spongy pitches conducive to your ankle and the injury that you sustained?
Yeah, I much preferred playing on pitches with a bit of grounding, Steve, absolutely. I mean, the problem about in those days when we played, and, the pitches weren't great come winter, were they? But I think the worst time was actually when it got to about March, in the winter when they were soft, and, it wasn't the problem, really. But when March came, it was, you got those March winds that were beginning to dry out the pitches. They weren't flat, they were bumpy, rigid, and they were probably the most difficult conditions to play in. The ball never came true to you, and you had to be very careful with your first touch. Where you look at the pitches now, you don't have to worry about your first touch now. It's as flat as a pancake, the pitches. So, funny, I was sat with John Robertson at a game. I said, it'd be lovely just to have 5 minutes on that pitch, just see what it was like to receive a ball now, wasn't it, John? Yeah, so, listen, they've got everything going for them now, players, haven't they, really? The better treatment for injuries, they're looked after well, better dietary information. You drink water at games, and it's so much better now than it was in terms of the treatments that they had in those days for players.
Now, John Robertson, is that the Scottish international and Nottingham Forest legend that used to paint your white boots black?
Black, yeah. Well, we still meet up now. John and I are good friends, and of course, John developed into a very fine player, didn't he? And,
legend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we still meet up, reminiscing about old times, and so it was. When he said, I never give him a tip because, he had white boots and he painted them black. So that's all right, so I give you a tip, John.
And Brian would say, we've got a fat lad, with Robbo.
Fat lad.
And
at lad down the left.
And at half time, he'd go missing and have a ciggy, wouldn't he, Robbo?
Yeah, he liked to fag, John, yeah. It wasn't until he had a heart scare about 3 or 4 years ago that he stopped smoking, John. He liked to fag.
What was your first football memory, Ian?
My first football, what, in terms of what?
Anything?
What, growing up, you mean?
Yeah, growing up, your first football memory.
First football memory. Cool, yeah, that's a difficult one, yeah. I think actually playing school football, I think, really. Yeah, I think I know what it was. It was actually lacing the balls on a Friday afternoon for the match and dubbing in the balls on a Friday afternoon, ready for the game next day. School football, yeah. Remember the old balls you had to lace up and, dubbing the ball, and, used to sort of try and make your boots softer with dubbing. I'm sure the old players have heard of dubbing. If you didn't have that, it's like playing in concrete boots.
I think the new ones have no idea what dubbing is or lacing up balls.
God, wouldn't have a clue, would they?
No, they wouldn't. But them balls, they were. I mean, when it rained and they were full of water, it was like heading a lump of concrete, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I think it put your head in as a kid, didn't it? When it was wet. But then, of course, if you catch it on the lace, it was even worse. But I think, to be fair, when I first started football, they've got the decent balls, then, the white ones and orange ones and that, so it wasn't too bad once to start. But yeah, I remember growing up as a kid, it was a heavy ball, heavy boots, and it wasn't easy. But I would think probably memories about growing up and school football and into youth team football and eventually coming to Forest, really. Yeah, I think they were the memories as a kid growing up, really, that sort of resonate with me.
And not going to Derby is also something that resonates with me.
Yeah,
wasn't your fault.
Yeah. No, it wasn't my fault.
Was it?
I mean, no? Cliffy never forgave me after that. But Cliffy and I got on well prior to that. And if he'd have just said to me that he came back to anyway, to cut a long story short, he came back to the where was it? The Midland Hotel in Derby, where I was with the Derby players prior to the game against Wolves next day, and said that the Forest secretary had signed the forms. I was now a Derby County player, which turned out to be rather incorrect. So, and of course, it all fell through. I think my wife got a phone call from the Forest chairman to say there's no way I was going to go to Derby County, because I think they'd let Henry Newton go there.
Yeah.
Maybe Terry Hennessy prior to me. So, I don't think I got much chance of going there. So, but listen, I'd like to have gone at the time. Derby, listen, I'm not knocking Cluffy as a manager, great manager and very successful. But I wish he'd just told me the truth there, and we could have gone on with them. I might have been able to force something if he'd told me that. But that was it. That's football, isn't it? And they're a good side. They had some great players at the side, Derby. Todd McFarlane, Kevin Hector, John O'Hare. Yes, Archie Gamble. So they had some really top players at the time, Derby, and went on to win the league that year, of course.
They certainly did. And my understanding is that although you'd signed, Brian hadn't signed the forms. And you're right, Nottingham Forest wouldn't let you go to Derby, would they?
No, that was it. No, Cluffy, I've got to be perfectly honest. I did sign the form, to sign for Derby.
Yeah.
He took them to the Forest ground, and consequently, they wouldn't sign them. But
right.
Cliffy came back and told me they had. Which is typical Brian, trying to bluff his way through it. But, listen, he was very, very successful at Forest and, in Derby as well. So you can never take away how successful he was as a manager. Quite unique.
Oh, absolutely. What Brian done at Forest and ultimately before what he'd done at Derby, you could argue that if the transfer had gone through for you, you could have been that missing jigsaw, that missing piece to that jigsaw to build a European Cup winning team at Derby before he did that at Nottingham. Because in many schools of thought, that Derby team in the 70s, early 70s, because Dave Mackay was the manager when they won it again in 1975. When they picked Alan Hudson's lot up the road at Stoke City. They were probably there was Liverpool, Derby, and of course well, not so much Manchester United, they were falling from grace, but the great Leeds United team, and Derby were in that three, and probably you might have just tipped them over and been a little bit more consistent, but who knows? When Man United
Well,
come
yeah,
calling,
who knows?
who's going to turn down Manchester United?
Well, that's right. Problem, retrospectively, it probably might have been the wrong time to join Manchester United. They were going through a bit of a transitional period. No disrespect to any of the players. I mean, still, the three great icons of British football were still there. Best, Lawton, Charlton. It was an absolute privilege to sit next to them in a dressing room, and an even bigger privilege to get on the pitch and play with them. So, from my point of view, it was a wonderful experience. And as I say, things personally were going really well when Tommy Docherty came. And he actually said to me, Tommy, it was a nice thing he said to me, that he didn't realise I was such a good player as he thought I was. So, I thought, oh, crikey, that was nice. He had played 2 or 3 games for him and done well. And yeah, give me quite a nice accolade, actually. So, really disappointed not to have played more games. I think I played about 40 odd, didn't I? And so really disappointed. I'd like to play, for another 3 or 4 years there, and maybe probably got within 100 goals or something. So, but there we go. That's football, isn't it? You've got to be grateful for what you've done. But as I say, I said to you earlier, Gabbie, that that was the biggest disappointment in my career, the injuries I received at important times for my career.
Absolutely, and there's always been a Manchester United connection, because Johnny Carey was your first manager when you signed, wasn't he?
He was. He came to Forest and transformed. Yeah, what a lovely man, a really nice man. Yeah, Johnny, and it was him who really got the 66-67 side together, and
And then Matt Gillies was the manager, and he was the manager when he was at Leicester that signed Alan Clark, because Manchester United were after Alan Clark. You might have played in the front line with Alan Clark as well, because United were building, wasn't they, after the successes of 68, which come on the back of the Babes in 58, God bless them all. And it is always difficult getting rid of players like Lord and Charlton, and not so much George, because George was younger than you.
Oh, absolutely. It is. They were absolute legends, weren't they, at Man United? But, unfortunately, we all have our time, unfortunately, do. And I think to be fair, I think it wanted really, a manager like Doherty come and, have a clean sweep and start again, really. Yeah. But listen, those players will always be remembered for being fantastic players. It was just an absolute tragedy what happened to George, wasn't it? What such a talented individual, and drink took its toll, unfortunately.
Sadly, it did, because when you first signed, as you've alluded to, you scored 5 goals in the league in the 11 games that were remaining. So you were very consistent. You were top goal scorer for Nottingham Forest, and for a wide player, that is unreal. And then it just went off the boil a little bit. Frank O'Farrell got the sack. Tommy Docherty come in. His debut game, Tommy's first game, was against Leeds, wasn't it?
Correct.
What a great pass that was from you to Willie Morgan, who was another tremendous winger.
Yes, Willie was a good player. Oh yeah, we played well that day. I think Leeds equalised more or less the last kick of the game, didn't they? And I had a good game that game, and the team played well, and Tommy was pleased. Very ebullient sort of character, Tommy. And he gave the club a lift, to be fair, Tommy, and. I don't know that they stayed up that season, didn't they? I got injured and I didn't play again after January. So, but they did manage to stay up that season. And of course, I couldn't play again. So, I think it was the following season they got relegated, didn't they? Then I think they had a clear out, and Tommy got them back into the first division in those days, of course, yeah.
Yeah, they did. It was a real transitional period, wasn't it? Really, 73, 74. But Tommy brought in some brilliant players. And
he did.
When United got relegated, you go, blimey, arguably the greatest team that's ever got relegated to the second division.
Oh, well, that was a tragedy, wasn't it? Club of their stature, yeah. Absolutely, the great players it had. But I say, every team has its day, doesn't every player has his day, and you just got to be ruthless, haven't you, in football, unfortunately, and start again sometimes, haven't you?
Absolutely. Is there a player that you would have loved to have played within your career, 60s or 70s, and why?
A good question, actually. Really, another good player. I suppose when probably I don't know. It's a difficult one because, as I say, I did have the absolute privilege of playing with Lord Best and Charlton. So I mean, it would be very difficult to sort of say you could play with better players at them. But what I would say around that time, there were some wonderful players about. I mean, Liverpool had some great players, and Leeds, of course. The Browne, the Giles, Eddie Gray. So there was numerous players and teams you probably would have thought, oh, I wouldn't mind being in that team. But I think it was just a plethora of them about in those days. There were so many, sort of decent sides around and some very, very good players. And, it was an absolute privilege to play against them, some of them, yeah.
Your favourite goal that you scored, would it be the goal against Arsenal in 1971 for Forest?
Yeah, I think that would be fair comment, Gabbie. I mean, yeah, probably the best goal I've scored, I would imagine. Yeah, although I scored one at Southampton, not dissimilar, but they gave Simon Chapman offside. I think he was stood behind a bloody corner flag. I mean, it wouldn't have happened these days, I don't know how they give that offside. But that was, I think it was Alan Ball's debut actually for Arsenal, if I remember.
Yeah, it was.
And vaguely, I can remember him. I picked the ball up about 5 or 10 yards outside our own box, and I can remember Alan Ball running to the side of me, slightly behind me, with his white boots, trying to keep up with me. And for some reason, it just resonates with me, that probably the white boots, but it was Bally. And by the way, what a great player he was, Bally. And anyhow, I got to about sort of 5 or 10 yards outside their box, and got all I could see was the white. It was white. They had the away kit on in those days. The Arsenal players, the yellow shirts, and I just saw, blimey, what am I going to do now? I don't know how I did it, Steve, but certainly I went about round a few of them, and actually then was confronted by Bob Wills, and I just thought, oh God, don't mess it up now, for God's sake. So, and I managed to get it home, and yeah, undoubtedly that was the best goal I scored. Yeah, but against a good side as well. So yeah, it was a very proud day for me, and one that I will remember fondly.
It wasn't too dissimilar to the goal that Diego Maradona scored for Argentina against England in 1986, was it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, cool, what a fantastic player he was, blimey, yeah. But, not too dissimilar, to be honest with you, yeah. But I think it was at probably a higher level that he scored it. But, it was still nice to score good goals. And I think, it's fondly remembered by all the older Forest fans anyhow. And I think it's probably, I think people say it's the best goal that's ever been scored down there. So that's something to cherish and remember.
It's certainly been voted the greatest goal ever to be scored at the City Ground. If you could have a one-to-one with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
A one-to-one? Do you mean in football?
A drink or no? Could be anything football, or it could be out of football. Anybody that's ever lived.
Blair, that's an interesting one. That is, again, one-to-one with somebody that... God, do you know, I think I would. Now, Brian Clough.
Okay, yeah.
Now, for the simple reason, I'd love to talk him through what happened at Derby. I know the great man's, passed away now, but it would have been lovely just to talk, and why he sort of ignored me after that, and the reasons for it, etc., etc. That would, I'd love to know the reasons for that now. Very intriguing, that is. How it happened, why it happened, and why he snubbed me afterwards.
Should I tell you why he didn't talk to you after when you signed for Manchester United?
Go on then.
Because he didn't like Manchester United. When Ron Atkinson was manager of Man United, he was there for 3, 4, possibly 5 seasons. Brian never spoke to him. When he left, no, he never. When he left, Cloughie was like best, because he got on great with Cloughie, Big Ron did, and vice versa. Yeah. And one of Ron's mates says, "Hey, Ron, he never talked to you while you were manager of Man United." And he said, that's Brian. He had this siege mentality against the big clubs. I think he come from, again, his working class background's been born up in the northeast in Middlesbrough. Yeah, absolutely. He didn't like Leeds for that reason as well.
Oh no, he hated Leeds, didn't he? Of course, and that was compounded when he went to work for them, isn't it?
Well, again, famously, he said, "Stick all your medals in a big dustbin," but he did after apologise really, and says, "Look, Ali Barley, you were a great, and it was didn't want to admit that you were the great team and that, but it was too late. It was when Cloughie was out the door, and that Brian had that ability to wind people up the wrong way at times, didn't
absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Who's your most difficult opponent?
Well, we used to talk about, John Roberts and myself used to talk about that, really, it was it was the quick, smallish ones that certainly caused you more. I think probably the one I had most difficult was Paul Reaney at Leeds.
Yeah.
He was quick, he was nasty, and of course he played in a very good side, and it was very difficult to get the ball and, sort of get a run at him, which most fullbacks you could. Very difficult to get at him with the ball. And of course, when you cross the ball, he used to leave his foot in. So, I think they'd had it off to a fine art how to spoil plays, Leeds United. So, Leeds in general, but Paul Reaney in particular was a difficult opponent.
They were all 1-11, and when Cloughie first met them, he literally went through 1-11, and he started, like with the goalkeeper, he didn't bother. Number 2, Paul Reaney, you're a dirty bastard. Terry Cooper, you're and he went through and called them all a bunch of dirty bastards.
I
but
know.
Again, that was Brian. But Leeds they could either fight their way or play the way. They were a team of assassins, as Paul Fletcher put it, that Don Revie put together, but you would love any of their players in your team.
Of course you would. Listen, they had some really good players, there's no doubt about that. And I think that was applicable to most teams in those days. Every team had 3 or 4 very good players, Gabbie, there was very few you could name without having, 1 or 2 really good players in the side, and certainly 1 or 2 could, as in inverted commas, could put it about. They always sort of had 3 or 4 in a team like that in those days, didn't they, really?
They certainly did. If you could revisit one season of your playing career, what season would you revisit and why?
Well, I think probably that the most successful. I mean, I went through my career and didn't win anything, unfortunately. But I would think that the 66-67 season at Forest was certainly the most successful side I played in. So consequently, you would say that possibly that was the most rewarding time of my career in terms of club football. The other great time was playing for England. Of course, it's a kid's dream, isn't it? To run out on Wembley and play for England. So I would say it's that Forest season and playing for England was certainly the highlights of my career. Yeah, and probably the third one, joining Manchester United, which was probably again every other kid's dream to play for Manchester United, but. Probably just went at the wrong time.
How disappointed were you when that goal was disallowed against Holland when you made your debut and it was 0-0?
Funny if it was on a Pathé News.
Yeah, I know. I watched it.
Have a look at it,
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair, it was offside, but naturally, it would have been euphoric to score a goal in your first game. And actually, I was a wee bit unlucky. I mean, I think I had 1 kicked off the line. I mean, I could have maybe had 2 or 3 that game with a bit of luck. And but that's how things transpire. And sometimes it goes for you, and sometimes it doesn't, unfortunately, in football. And you've got to take the rough with the smooth. It's that type of game, isn't it?
It certainly is. Favourite TV shows from the 70s? What did Ian Storey-Moore do away from the game of football?
Cool. In the 70s, crikey. Oh, interesting one, that, Steve. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much to choose on the television in those days, was it? I think the Cowboy was Bonanza, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
That was on was it Friday or Wednesday? I used to quite enjoy watching that. That was one Western I watched. Some of the old comedy programs that, of course, couldn't be shown now, due to the racial context, unfortunately. It was some of those were quite funny, weren't they? And I used to love watching a program called Candid Camera, would you believe, when, taking the mickey out of people. I think probably that epitomises my humour key, a bit of friendly banter and a bit of mickey taking I quite enjoy, which probably, is embedded in being a professional footballer, isn't it?
What's the maddest thing that you've seen in a dressing room?
Maddest thing I've seen in a dressing room? Jim Baxter.
Okay, talk to me about Slim.
Well, Jim, it was a real character. Probably somebody said to the manager it was a funny. Well, it wasn't really funny, really. But you think, Christ, how was he said that to the manager? Jim was a great, he was a great character. I mean, of course, prior to him coming to Forest, and in his early career, he was a fantastic player, Jim. Wonderful ability, and I remember he sort of terrorised England one day at Wembley, didn't he, in the early 60s? Yeah. And so, unfortunately for Jim, I think that it would be fair to say that he was past his best when he came to Forest, but he was still a great guy, and he gave us a lot of laughs. And this particular day, I think we played at Newcastle this day, and none of us played particularly well. And of course, when you come into a dressing room, everybody hasn't played particularly well. You keep your head down and not to try and catch the manager's attention. But anyhow, he looked over at Jim and said, "Jim," he said, "that's the worst performance I've seen from a professional footballer in my life." Jim just got up, walked past him with his shirt and shorts off on his way into the bathroom, and said, "Don't worry, boss, there's a lot more of those to come." I think the manager sort of just well, he had a look of disdain on his face. I think, what can I do? Yeah, but that was Jim. Had some great one-liners, and he's great fun to be with.
Because he wasn't at Forest for very long. He did come down from Sunderland, didn't he?
That's correct. Yeah.
And as you say, one of the greatest left foots in Scottish football ever. Slim Jim.
Oh, he was. Absolutely, he was a legend, wasn't he, in Scottish football, Jim? And but he was a character, Jim. Liked to drink and liked to laugh and liked to joke, and I think football was a secondary thing when he came to Forest.
Yeah, I think sometimes it happens, doesn't it, towards the end of your career. Towards the end of your career, you went and played in the NASL in America for Chicago Sting. How did that move come about?
Well, basically because it was Bill Folks. Remember Bill Folks?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
United, played in European Cup final.
Yep.
And of course, I knew Bill from Manchester United, and he was in charge there at Chicago Sting. I said, "Well, Bill, I don't know what to do with this ankle, of mine." I said, of course, the pitches over there at the time was that AstroTurf, and the one in Chicago, it was one of those massive, probably quite an iconic stadium called Soldier Field, where they played the American football. But they've got this AstroTurf down. It was like concrete, and unfortunately for myself and the team, I think I played about 6 or 7 games before I did my ankle again. So I didn't play too long over there, and naturally disappointed in that respect. But yeah, enjoyed the short time there. But that came about basically because of Bill Folks. Bill was in charge there, and he I don't know how long he stopped there. I can't remember, to be honest with you. But I think in those days it was just taking off the American football. I mean, it wasn't what it's like now. They don't. We used to play at Soldier Field. I think it was about 120,000 capacity. We used to get about 6,000 there, all in the middle of the centre of the main stand there. So certainly it wasn't well patronised in those days.
And it wasn't on the TV as well. They did have a problem getting it off the ground. It wasn't until Pele went over there that he really lit the fuse. And I think there was a trade deal between Henry Kissinger and the Brazilian government that allowed Pele to go and play for the Cosmos.
Yeah, Beckenbauer went and didn't he? They got quite a few massive stars of age. I mean, I think it's certainly picked up over the years. I think it does rather well now, doesn't it? They get good crowds. I sometimes see the odd flash of it on TV here, and the crowds seem to be pretty good over there at the moment. Yeah.
But you had some great players that played in those days in the old NASL. Everybody who was somebody played there, didn't they? The likes of Kelly and Naiskins and Cruyff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it took its time, but it certainly gathered pace.
Yeah, I think Terry Hennessy and Alan Hinton went out then and ran a club. I think it was Tulsa. I think.
Yeah, he did.
My memory bears me correct.
And then he moved to Seattle. Yeah. Alan did.
Yeah. Alan's never left Seattle. Would you believe? He came over. We saw him about maybe three years ago, and. Alan's he never left Seattle. Him and his wife settled there, and I think she's got a very good business, and he's quite happy over there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I believe quite a number of the players, settled over in the States. Yeah.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he had obviously the Derby connection because he had the white boots, but he started at Nottingham Forest, didn't he, Alan Hinton? And then when Jimmy Gabriel got the sack, he got the gig at Seattle Sounders. And
did he?
Oh, yeah, and he really well, Uddy was there as well at the time, and they had a great season. I mean, I think Alan still holds, I think, the most assists in the NASL. Alan Hinton was some player, wasn't he, as a winger?
Alan was a good. Yeah. Oh, Alan was a good winger. Absolutely, 2 great feet. I mean, he was probably one of the greatest crossers of a ball I've ever seen. Either foot, on the run as well. I mean, he was pinpoint actually with his and had a great striker of the ball as well. I remember he got quite some memorable goals at Forest from distance. Yeah, he could really strike a ball left foot or right foot. Yeah.
Any song or songs that remind you of your playing days?
Of course, songs, blimey, there's quite a lot in those days, wasn't there, flying about, wasn't there, really? God, blimey. I used to like the, what was it, it was the rock and roll era, wasn't it, in those days, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
There was, I don't think one in particular, Steve, but, certainly like the old pop music in those days. There's some fabulous songs flying about, of course, and used to pop down the odd nightclub now and again, and that's actually where I met my wife, actually, one of them. So, yeah, happy days. They really were. I mean, the late 60s, 70s were the really swinging times, weren't they? You probably vaguely remember them, but they were really good times for a young man dotted around, mooching around the town.
What had the best nightclubs, Nottingham or Manchester? I mean, George had the famous one, didn't he? Slack Alice's up there in Manchester.
Yeah. Well, there was one called, George had one called, well, not George, but we used to frequent one with him called Blinkers, where Michael Parkinson used to go. And I actually met Malcolm Parkinson at this club called Blinkers. It was they got quite a lot of celebrities down there in those days, and that was very popular. Of course, then George opened Slack Alice's in Manchester, which went on the odd occasion. So happy days.
What footballers would you have found in Slack Alice's? Because Mike Summerby was a great friend of George as well, and there was a camaraderie, wasn't there, between both of the Manchester clubs, really, the players.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, they were a very decent side, weren't they? In the early 70s, the Summerbys, the Franny Lees. Christ, had one or two really decent players, and Colin Bell, of course, who was a fantastic midfield player. Colin. But I mean, I didn't used to see them around town too much. Maybe Mike, I used to see him with Bestie a few times, but other than that, sort of, they used to keep the distance, really. I think Malcolm Allison was more on the town than the players.
What was your relationship with Malcolm? Did you know him well? Because he was one of the game's great characters as well, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. I just remember, I've got the cutting now, actually. I mean, funny, my father used to keep cuttings, out of the papers and that. And one thing that resonates with Malcolm was that I think he's writing before one season. He said there was only 5 players who would get 20 goals that season, in the first division then. And of course, I was one of them. I think Martin Chivers, Franny Lee. He did mention about, and I thought, oh, that's nice of him to think that. And so sort of when I used to play, he always used to wink at me, Mike. I always remember giving me the odd wink or two, and I think probably, I might have been able to have gone there, actually, I remember one of the players said to me, "Any ever fancy coming here, let us know," so... But, they were a good side at the time, and Malcolm had his own ideas, didn't he? And an innovative coach, wasn't he, Malcolm? He really thought about things, didn't he? And did very well for them, yeah.
I think a coach definitely ahead of his time. I think of him as a manager, he struggled a little bit, didn't he, at City then and at Crystal Palace. But as a coach, I think he was fantastic. And as a player, he lost a lung, didn't he? He had tuberculosis.
He did, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was. He had this sort of playboy image, didn't he?
Fedora and the cigar.
Big fur coat, and it's a bit of a lad around the town, but he's a nice guy, and I think that was applicable for most players involved in the game in those days, wasn't it, really? There was quite a number of characters about, wasn't there?
What's your greatest memory? If you could sum up the 70s or the 60s and the 70s in a sentence, how would you describe it?
60s and 70s, what, in terms of football?
Yeah, in terms of football, yeah.
I think basic. I think John and Rob and myself talked about. We all thought the 60s and 70s, certainly early 70s, the most difficult time to play to play football, and just because of the physicality of it and the poor pitches. We all, that's what we've always thought, John and I, that it was a really difficult time. And we both think the same now, that, the great players of yesterday could still play now on these good pitches, better dietary advice, better physios, et cetera, et cetera. So, it was a great time, but football was very difficult, and if you didn't have a sort of good mental attitude and a toughness about you, you wouldn't have survived in those days.
Now, if you wasn't a footballer, you would have been a journalist, and you used to do a little Moore's Corner, didn't you, for a local paper?
I mean, I did. Yeah, my father was worried about me, not having something to fall back on if and actually myself and David Pleat, we did a journalistic course together, and in the evenings, so. That's something I probably could have fallen back on, Gabbie, hopefully. You don't know. That. It's something I would have probably liked to have done if I hadn't made the grade as a professional footballer, yeah.
Would you fancy... Sorry, go on. Would you fancy doing it today?
Not now, I think just now I enjoy watching football, to be honest, Gabbie, and... I don't mind doing the odd little favour people now and again, but I don't think I'd want to take it any further now, really, yeah.
And your last job in football, was that working for Martin at Aston Villa?
Yeah. I was just talking to Martin the other day. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, I was the chief scout at Villa. Of course, Robbo was our assistant manager, so, we knew each other from the past. I mean, Martin came to the club as a youngster when I think he was about 18 from Ireland, and, we sort of got pally together, and I tried to look after him, and... because I was an established player then, and he did very well, had a very good career, and turned out to be a very, very good player, Martin, and went on to have a successful managerial career. The Villa experience was good. I mean, we finished I think the sixth position 3 seasons on the trot, and of course that wasn't good enough, and I bet they thought it probably good enough now for Villa, but. It wasn't good enough in those days, and even, it was disappointed in respect that, we thought it was reasonably good to finish 6th at that level, and of course the fans want more and more, don't they, unfortunately?
I think fans do, and I think sometimes owners are a sandwich short of a picnic and don't understand and don't listen to former players, and I think the game is worse for that. And a little birdie tells me that Martin wouldn't sign anybody until Storey-Moore had said, go on.
Well, I wouldn't suggest that so much, but I mean, to be fair to Martin, he got himself out and about when he could,
Yep.
If the work playing on the Saturday, he used to come with me, and we'd go abroad together, and except, I mean, he always had the last say, Martin. We disagreed at times about who should come and who shouldn't, but listen, once the manager's made his decision, as people that work for him, you've got to stick with that, and and work with him. So, as far as I was concerned, that's absolutely fine. Martin was the manager, and he should have the final decision. Absolutely
what was the
right.
biggest player that got away in those days from Aston Villa?
Well, I'll tell you who it was, and that's one of the reasons Martin resigned, and we went with him. Was we wanted to sign Moussa Dembele? Can you remember we went to Tottenham?
Yeah.
I could have got him. I've got it all set up. I'd been following for quite some time, and. This was just prior before Martin left, and I think it was one of the reasons he resigned. It was we wanted to sign Moussa Dembele. I don't know whether he went on to have a really terrific time at Tottenham. He's a good player, strong, technically very good, could go past people. £3 million we could have got him for at Villa. And the other player we wanted to sign on a free transfer, would you believe, was Scott Parker. I'd got all that set up, and the next season he went to Tottenham as well and got Player of the Year. So the 2 players that we wanted to sign that season went on to prove wonderful acquisitions for Tottenham. So that was a massive disappointment, and certainly those 2 that were stand out amount in terms of not getting them. Yeah.
It's crazy though, isn't it? Because I do another podcast with Silky, and he was telling me about Georgie Weah. I mean, he couldn't get George Weah a club in this country, and now Kevin Keegan at Newcastle, although Kevin wasn't like Martin, he didn't look at him, but they turned down Zinedine Zidane.
Who did?
Newcastle.
Did they really?
Yeah, Silky'd phone him up, and he says, "You're having a laugh, ain't you, Kev?" He said, "No, I haven't seen him, but my people have looked at him, and we don't think he's good enough to play bottom of the Championship."
But
again,
dropped a clanger there,
that's opinions, isn't it? And
Listen,
the game of football's full of it.
Opinions, yeah. Listen, people can't get it right all the time. It's absolutely impossible, But yeah, it was. I suppose when you're in the scouting business, I suppose it's disappointing when managers don't go for who you want to. But yeah, I had a great working relationship with Martin, and so it was fine, But it's time moves on in football. It's a game of evolution, isn't it? Unfortunately, Steve, and players change, managers change, owners change. So you've got to go with the times, unfortunately.
And finally, do you still look at football like you did with that scouting eye on players?
Good question. Players catch your eye, don't they?
Yeah.
Normally, while I'm talking, I'm just watching Bayern Munich now, and Leon. So I still love to watch football, and I talked to David Pleat. David Pleat's still a good friend of mine. We talk to him probably 3 times a week. He's still working for Tottenham, and a very good football aficionado, David. He knows the game inside out, knows players, and we do talk. I don't particularly watch players, but sometimes if I'm going to a game, at Forest, Dave will say, just have a look at this play for me today, will you? And see what you think. So. Unless sort of somebody says to, have just a little look at somebody, it's just possibly a general look and enjoy the game now, Steve, without any responsibility that I enjoy.
So who's the unbrushed diamonds? If you could name 2 players that have caught your eye, what 2 players would you want to sign now if you was a scout?
Now?
Yeah, if you was a scout for a club.
Blimey, yeah, crikey. That's a really good question. That is cool, dear. Yeah. Very difficult one, that, Steve. There's a lot of good players about now, isn't there, really? I tend not to watch the younger players. The problem is now, Steve, it's probably the established players I'm watching now, the ones that have already made the grade. I tend not to watch the youth games now, unfortunately, so it'd be really a bit of a difficult question to answer now. But, there's some great players about, isn't there, and at the moment, so... there's quite a few you'd fancy, but whether you could get them, of course, is one thing that would interest me. One thing I always thought about, I just wonder how these top managers today, the Mourinhos, the Guardiolas, Pochettino, 1 or 2 others have always had money to spend. I just wonder how they would cope managing teams like, say, Rochdale, Accrington, Burton Albion. It would be an interesting thesis to try and... wouldn't it, to see how they would cope at that level? Really, that would interest me. It really would.
Well, a player that's coping at the top level is Gnabry. He scored. Scored Bayern Munich on the way to another European final, and looks as though it's been great one. Now, two of the crack sides in Europe. Well, it's been a wonderful trip down memory lane, Ian. So can I thank you very much, sir? And those were the days.
You're very welcome, Gabbie. Nice speaking to you. My pleasure.
Storey-Moore, my lord. Storey-Moore, still the most sung about Nottingham Forest player to this very day. That's iconic and that's legendary.
Lovely. Thanks, Gabbie.
Cheers, pal. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers. Yeah, give us a ring anytime you want. Yeah, no problem.
Cheers, Mucka. Thanks, that. Appreciate it.
Nice speaking to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Schönes Mädchen, komm doch mal rüber. Schönes Mädchen.